All right, welcome back into another edition of Jake's Takes. I am your host, Jake Masucci, and today we are going to talk about some of the Pac 12 movement. We've had a lot of movement, and the Pac 12 is officially done. I mean, it's pretty much over. It's turned into the Pac 4. There's only four teams remaining, and some crazy stuff went on. Like, a lot happened ever since the USC and the UCLA movement from last year to the Big Ten. A lot of crazy stuff has been going on with the Pac 12. A lot of people talking about, like, just how their TV deals haven't been the same and how things have not been working for them. So today in this short little Jake's Takes, we're going to talk about it. I got 20-minute timer going, and let's just get started. I'm going to start from the beginning, kind of set the stage a little bit and like kind of show you where the Pac-12 went wrong. But the Pac-12, they've been around for 108 years. Like, this is a really prestigious conference in pretty much everything. And UCLA, basketball wise, is one of the greatest basketball schools of all time, and they did all of that in the Pac-12 conference. And even last year during the NCAA tournament, I think it was last year or the year before, we saw so many Pac-12 teams like go crazy, absolutely crazy, doing great stuff. We saw USC make the Elite Eight. We saw UCLA make the Final Four. We saw a lot of Pac-12 teams making runs, going far. So, like, this is a prestigious sports conference. Like, there's a reason that we call these conferences the Power Five, and that's because there's the Big Ten, there's the ACC, there's the Pac-12, there's I'm missing SEC, and then I can't think of the conferences right now for some reason. But I mean, and the Big 12. I didn't say the Big 12, duh. And we'll be talking about the Big 12 a lot in this. But like, looking at it, the Pac-12 is a prestigious conference, and that's why this is such a big deal, because it's just falling apart. And you can see other conferences really benefiting from it, but we'll talk about it a little later. So let's just get into the start. So it basically comes down to not their commissioner right now, but their commissioner from before. His name's Larry Scott. So he got the job, and the big thing that Pac-12 really struggled with was they struggled with the TV deal. They did have a TV deal back in the day. They had one with ESPN a little bit, but they'd always get the late night. And being on the West Coast, like, it's really difficult to have the late night. It truly is, because it's just difficult to attract those East Coast fans because it's 10:30 at night. And it's like, why am I going to stay up late to watch this Pac-12 team when most of the time they didn't even have that great of a football team? I think you could argue back when USC was that talented at football and had that Reggie Bush and the Pete Carroll era where they were just flat out insane. I'm sure people would stay up and stuff, but a lot of people would stay up for the basketball because that's kind of where it was. Like, they were better at basketball back then, and that's what people would want to watch. But looking at it, it's just like, it's very difficult from a business standpoint to look at it and be like, hey, like, playing at 10:30 on the East Coast is, we're still going to get some views. No, you're really not. Like, it's tough, especially for the football wise, especially when football in the East Coast is going on from 12 o'clock till 10:30, or I mean, it'll end at 1 o'clock, like those 10:30 games. It's unbelievable being on the East Coast myself. Like, you don't love it, but and then on the West Coast, like, you're done at 10, and then you'll go to bed, and you start at like 10 too, which is insane. Actually, it's 9 over there, which is crazy. It's crazy over there. But it starts with Larry Scott and his looking for a TV deal. And he really struggled with this after his ESPN contract was up, and he always wanted to make this like his own TV kind of network for the Pac-12. And I'm pretty sure that this was based on kind of the Big East model. That was an old thing. And the Big East, they really were good with this when they started. They were so good with the TV aspect because they partnered with a small ESPN back in the day. There's a great 30 for 30 on it. I think it was called the Requiem of the Big East. And this was like the old Big East, and how all of the like the college basketball world and media presence was kind of created off of that Big East and how talented everything was. It's a great documentary. Check that out if you haven't seen it. But like getting back into it, like he wanted to create a similar network to what the Big East had in the past with their basketball, but just make it their Pac-12. And they actually have their own Pac-12 network. A lot of networks have it. The Big East or the Big Ten has a Big Ten network. The ACC has an ACC network on ESPN. It's partnered with ESPN, and that's where the old Big East was partnered with. They were partnered with ESPN. Now Big East is partnered with like a Fox Sports type thing. But the Pac 12 isn't partnered with anybody. They have a Pac 12 network, and I'm pretty sure you have to pay for it on TV networks. I'm not positive on that end, but I did watch a couple games on their network. It's okay, it's not bad. The USC Oregon State game was on that last year, and that ended up being a good game. It's not a bad network. Like they do well, they do a good job, they have some good analysts, but it's very difficult when that's your pretty much your only sense of profit. That's why a lot of these big conferences have their own type of deal with other like bigger TV deals that can like create good content, like the SEC's with CBS, and then you look at the Big Ten, and they're sponsored with like a Fox. They got a lot of Fox games. Michigan, Ohio State was on Fox. ACC, they're partnered with ESPN like all the way to the brink. Like Clemson was on ESPN almost more times than I could count. It was unbelievable. And those three conferences really attached with their own. And you'll always see that 4:30 game. You'll always see like a Bama playing or an Auburn playing or something like that. And that's mostly because CBS is attached with the SEC, and they got a great contract there. So that's part of where it all lines up, and how you can create a successful sense of money and sense of purpose with the TV deals. And a lot of the athletic money comes from TV deals. So, pretty much getting back into it, Larry Scott, he just really struggled to find it because nobody really wanted to invest in their Pac 12 network because the Pac 12 wanted to keep most of the money to themselves. ESPN actually offered them a 50-50 split where they were like, okay, you can have your own network, you can do all the stuff you want to do, but we need a 50-50 split in this profit. And the Pac 12 was so greedy that they were like, we don't even want to do 50-50. We don't even want to do 60-40 in our favor. We're just going to try to find a different deal. And them not finding that deal was really difficult. And Larry Scott actually ended up out the door. And right now it's George. I'm not going to say his last name right. I think it was I can't say it. I can't say it, but it is what it is. But he came in. But the only problem with that is he has no experience of being a commissioner in a conference at all. And Larry Scott didn't have any experience in being a conference commissioner at all either. So having two guys without experience is really difficult because it's hard for people to do their first big deal, which a big deal is a TV deal. It's a huge deal. And they weren't able to get it done. And if I'm USC and UCLA, it's like, I'd be thinking about getting out the door. And that's exactly what they did. And the Big Ten came calling. I believe Kevin Warren was still the commissioner at the time, but Kevin Warren came calling, and just like that last year, UCLA and USC out the door. And I remember seeing a stat, like seeing the revenues that the Big Ten makes compared to the Pac-12, and it is more than 40 million. Like the Big Ten creates 50 million every year, and a normal conference would create like 30, and the Pac-12 couldn't even get close to 30 million. So you're looking at the Big Ten, and it's like they're making 20 million more than like an average conference would. I'm signing up for that every single time, and that's why USC and UCLA went, even though like travel is going to be an issue, and that's going to be something that we're going to have to worry about when it comes around. And it's crazy that it's coming around soon, but it is, and if I'm them, I'm doing that 100%. I think it was a great move. It was awesome. And that leads into this year. It's like you wait a year if you're the other Pac-12 teams, it's like, all right, USC and UCLA left, but we still got 10 teams, and the Pac they used to be called the Pac-10. So like it's like, all right, we can go back to the Pac-10 model and be like, okay, we got to wait a little bit longer. But if they can't figure out this TV deal, it's going to be very difficult for us to stay. And I heard a lot of stuff about Oregon and Washington, like looking around, trying to figure out where they go. A lot of people were talking about, hey, maybe the Big Ten's going to do something. And then right after the SEC made that splash for Texas and Oklahoma, it was like, oh man, like what's going on there, you know? And then the next news that comes around is that Colorado is going to move out of the Pac-12 and move into the Big 12. So I thought that was a big move for the Big 12. And Colorado leaving you at a Pac-9. It's like, I don't know about the rest of these guys. You know, like why would they stay if three teams have already left the conference and you still haven't found a TV deal? It's like, why am I staying? You know, like there's no reason to. So then the big news hits. Yes, not yesterday. It was, I think, last Wednesday, if I'm not mistaken. Last Wednesday, and Oregon and Washington are in conversations to join the Big Ten. Now, a lot of people like just were automatically like, "Oh, it's happening," blah blah blah, it's happening, and I was like, I don't know, we'll wait. You know, it wasn't official. I was like, okay, we'll wait. We'll see what happens. Hopefully something will be figured out. Like I wasn't sure if I loved the idea of it. And then like you kept hearing these conversations still happening, and then the next day you hear about Arizona having conversations with the Big 12. And it's like, wow, maybe the Pac-12 is going to fall apart, you know? Like this could be unbelievable. Like the whole Pac-12 completely falling apart and moving on from the conference, that'd be ridiculous. They used to be called the Conference of Champions, you know? Like this is unbelievable. These teams are thinking about leaving so much. And then you hear on Friday, it's like it's done. Oregon and Washington are going to be moving into the Big Ten in 2024, 2025. And then you hear right shortly after that, Arizona, same thing. And then shortly after that, you hear about three more teams to the Big 12, just out of nowhere, like completely. Or I'm sorry, two more teams. And that's Arizona State and Utah. And it's like, wow. So basically, to clear up what I'm saying, these are the teams that are on the move from the Pac-12. So we talked about USC, UCLA. That was last year's news. But this year, Oregon and Washington are going to be joining USC and UCLA in the Big Ten. So I'm sure all four of those teams are definitely, if you look at it, going to be in the Big Ten West. And then you're going to move some teams into the Big Ten East and like figure it out from there. It should be interesting to see like how that'll flow in football and basketball. Oregon really gives you some talent on the football end. UCLA and USC, like they speak for themselves. Football is going to be unbelievable. It's going to be difficult for some of those West teams. I think it's really going to give Wisconsin some challenges. I think USC is going to be able to play for the top in football, especially with Lincoln Riley there. Like that guy really knows how to coach. And then you're looking at, I feel like at the top now, you're looking at USC, Michigan, and Ohio State almost every year. And then Penn State shortly behind, like trying to figure it out. I really like Penn State this year. I got my college football preview coming out soon, so be on the lookout for that. But like looking at the football side, it's just unbelievable. And Washington gives you like a great name. Washington's really had some good basketball prospects in the past. They've been doing some stuff with that. Markelle Fultz was one of the best prospects we've seen from a prospect standpoint. You know, he hasn't really shown it in the NBA. Still a solid role player for sure. Then you got like a guy like Matisse Thybulle, great role player. You got a guy like Isaiah Thomas, 5'9", Isaiah Thomas, not Detroit Isaiah Thomas, but that guy was a great player, really was a star for 1 year. It was flat out awesome. And then, you know, like you've seen guys come in from Washington and have some impact immediately on the basketball end. So I think they're going to add some athleticism too. And Oregon's made some runs too. I didn't even mention Oregon was in that Elite Eight when I was talking about the Pac-12 and the March Madness a few years ago. So Oregon is someone else that's just such a talented athletic program, and they have great endorsement deals too for their student athletes. So that's just going to give you an even better sports mindset if you're looking at the Big Ten, And then looking at the teams moving to the Big 12, you got Arizona, Arizona State, Utah, and Colorado. And I really think this is great for the Big 12 because the Big 12 just came off a big blow of losing both Oklahoma and Texas. So now you add in those teams, and especially like basketball wise, adding in Arizona. You already added in Houston, which is great, I think, for basketball. And adding in Arizona for basketball too, it's like, wow, like you guys are going to be a very tough basketball conference. Looking at it from Colorado on the basketball end, it's like, ugh, this is going to be tough. But if you keep Dion around, like Dion's making this team a very talented, like this is going to be very difficult for them to win, but I think it's going to be good too because it gives you that football aspect still too. Utah is a fantastic get for them too, football wise. They've created a great program there. Arizona State has had some solid teams in the past. I think they were just following Arizona no matter where they went. Like that's a great rivalry, and I love that Arizona State was just all over the fact like we're going to the Big 12 too. We got to keep this thing afloat, And like you bring in BYU, another great football team, like. I think they're going to be fine. The Big 12. They got so many teams now, and they basically use this Pac-12 falling apart to create their conference and build it back up. I really think they're going to be okay. And I'm really excited to see the Big 12 in the future. I'm excited to see how these teams click. Basketball-wise, this conference is unbelievable. I'm just going to list some of the names. I got it here on my phone. Arizona, which is a great basketball team last year. I'm just talking about the teams last year, too. Kansas State made the Sweet 16 last year. It was unbelievable. Kansas is always outstanding at basketball. TCU had a great team last year. Cincinnati's another solid football program in there, too. UCF is now in the Big 12. They're another solid football program as well. You add in a team like West Virginia. Great basketball, solid football as well. Texas Tech, same thing. Solid basketball, solid football. You add in Oklahoma State, solid football, solid basketball, similar. Iowa State, same thing. Houston, great basketball over there. BYU, great football. And Baylor's great at both. So, I mean, their football's been down a little bit recently. But if you're looking at that conference, even without the Texas and Oklahoma, like building them up the way that they were, it's still a very solid conference and very much worth putting as a Power 5 conference, So now we got 4 teams left in the Pac-4 that we got to talk about a little bit. And that is Cal, Stanford, Oregon State, and Washington State. And if I'm talking about these 4 teams, I got to separate them into who I think are very similar. And Stanford and Cal are very similar, and that's just because of the fact that these are both more academic programs than athletic programs, So if I'm them, I'm looking at this like, okay, we want to keep our athletics going because that can give us some money. But like losing the Pac-12, I think the Pac-12 is done. Like we got to move on from the Pac-12. So I don't think it's going to be a thing anymore because there's no way we could have a Pac-4, and I don't think the Mountain West is dying to just go to the Pac-12. A team that has like no TV revenue at all. So I'm thinking like, okay, why don't we move down a little bit to like the Mountain West or the American Conference or something like that, where we don't have to focus more on our football or our basketball, but we're still going to create some money and be able to help our academics. I think for them, it might even be better to go into like an American Conference type thing. And I get it. The Mountain West is more on the West Coast, but like the Mountain West, it's tough. It's very tough. And that's why I think Washington State and Oregon State should consider that more. I think Oregon State's going to be a little more tricky in that scenario. I think they're going to want to really try to get to the Big 12 or the Big 10, especially the Big 10, because I think they kind of want to keep that Oregon thing going. I think it would be difficult for them for the Big Ten because I think they'd be just one of those not relevant teams in the Big Ten because there's going to be a lot of those now. I feel like a team like Illinois, like they're going to not be as relevant. Minnesota, they're not going to be as relevant. Teams like that, even a Nebraska type, like it could be tough for them to stay relevant in that conference because there's so many heavy hitters. So if I'm an Oregon State, I'm looking at a Mountain West like, okay, we could take a step down. But now we can really up our basketball programs and our football programs and really like stand out and be one of those teams that compete in both the NCAA tournament and possibly for a playoff spot every year. And if they're competing for playoff spots in football, then conferences are going to be like, whoa, maybe we should bring him into the Big 12 or something like that. I think the Big 12 would be their best bet to try to get into, and I think the Big 12 would be more than willing to put them or to give them a spot with open arms. But that would be interesting to see what Oregon State does. With Washington State, I do think it would probably be best to move down to the Mountain West. I think with Washington State, they got a great football program. Um, they've had some quarterbacks in the past. Their basketball program's not the best thing in the world. So I think moving down would be better for them, being able to compete with the teams like Boise, teams like Fresno, you know, and I really think it would help them try to build them back up to the spot where they could be like, okay, maybe we can move up now, because I don't think they have the name recognition that Washington does. And yes, you want to play Washington, but again, it's the same problem we ran into with Oregon State. It's like we don't want to be irrelevant in our own conference. In the Pac-12, we were still relevant. In the Big Ten, especially with Texas and Oklahoma going over there too, like we're not going to be as relevant, or not Texas and Oklahoma, excuse me, UCLA and USC. Like we're not going to be as relevant. It's just the bottom line. So looking at it that way, if I'm Oregon State and Washington State, I consider moving down to move up in the future. And then if I'm Cal and Stanford, I'm like, maybe we should just focus on academics and move on for the better.